Okay, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Furman.
Present.
Councilmember Holmes is absent. Councilmember Miller.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ramos Amit.
Present.
And Mayor Ortiz.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments?
None, Mayor.
None? All right, then we'll go ahead and adjourn to our closed session. Thanks.
Recording stopped.
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have a disqualification you wanted to announce? I don't know which number it is.
Are we still?
Sorry.
It's the
Sorry.
Recording in progress.
Bliss Studio or something?
Are we good?
Which number is it?
3.2.
3.2.
Okay, we're back on.
So we're going to have one, what was it? 3.2?
So I can announce it if you'd like.
Go ahead, yeah.
So the Mayor Pro Tem has announced a disqualification on item 3.2 as a source of income.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and adjourn to closed session. Thanks.
Recording stopped.
On? Okay.
All right, thank you all for joining us. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Wayman Furman?
Aye. I mean,
Okay,
I'm ready to vote.
that's it. We're going.
I am present.
Thank you. Councilmember Holmes?
I am also present.
Councilmember Miller?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ramos Amit?
Present.
And Mayor Ortiz.
Present. Thank you. And we have an invocation from Reverend Julie Hodges from St. Andrew Community Presbyterian Church. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation. Please join me as I lead us in prayer. Holy God, we thank you for this evening and the opportunity to serve you in our great city of Indio. Thank you for all of the growth and expansion of commerce we've experienced in these last years under the council's steady guidance. I ask that you give wisdom and strength and blessing to each member of the council and that they would daily rely upon you. Help them to govern our city with justice and compassion for all. We thank you for all the guests who have been in our region these past weeks and who will be here soon for Coachella Fest and Stagecoach in these next weeks. And we pray that they would continue to find our city hospitable and gracious as they enjoy and celebrate music and life. May they come to love our desert as we do. We give you thanks for all good things, and I pray in the name of Jesus. In whose name I pray, amen.
City Attorney, do we have any reports on closed session?
Thank you, Mayor. We have no reportable action out of closed session today.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our presentations. This month, we are celebrating Women's History Month, and we recognize all the hard work and sacrifice that women have endured in our history, in their fight for equality in our society. I wanted to recognize first our Mayor Pro Tem and Lupe Ramos Amit and our Councilmember Holmes, especially today, because we know how much you had to fight to be sitting up here with us, and how much extra pressure and discrimination there is for women in general, but especially women in politics. Also want to thank you for what you do for our community and for being great role models for our women in our community. I also wanted to recognize all the wonderful women on our staff today and who are doing a great job in moving our city forward and bringing all this progress and innovation to our city. And of course, our all-women Youth Advisory Council that's here with us. And they're extremely ambitious, and we're really excited to see what you will accomplish in your education and your careers in the future. So let's give them a round of applause, please. So now, therefore, I, Oscar Ortiz, along with the Indio City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of March 2023 as Women's History Month in the city of Indio, and urge all to strive to create a community where every woman and girl knows that her possibilities know no bounds. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Indio to be affixed this 15th day of March 2023. I wanted to see, could we get a picture with our Youth Advisory Council, our council members, and our women's staff here? Yeah.
Yeah, women rule.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to our report from our Youth Advisory Council. We have Viviana Tariquez.
Good evening, sitting council members. I'm Viviana Tariquez, representing the Indio Youth Advisory Council. Since the last time you saw us, YAC has attended the most recent Youth Desert Town Hall, where we got to hear a speech from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We also got together on Avenue 46 for a street cleanup, picking up any trash in the bushes or along the side of the road. And finally, we got together to film a couple more directing change videos. The first, which will be played in a moment, which focuses on having hope even during difficult moments, called Mental Health. Yeah. And then our second video and our last video, which is a video that interviews Shadow Hills High School students about the topic of mental health, called Through the Lens of Culture.
Yes, my aunt struggles with bipolar depression. Myself and some family friends have suffered with depression. It's a very heavy thing and it really impacts your life. My family doesn't really talk about it. We don't really acknowledge it that much. We don't really like talking about it, but it's well known. It's not something that we talk about. We know that it happens in our family, but we don't take into consideration and get help, I guess. I would say it's just a hidden subject in the family.
Yeah, my family, they bring it up about once a month, and they ask how I'm doing, they ask about my mental health, if I need to see anybody, and I talk to my mom. Especially in the Hispanic community, I feel like a lot of the advice about mental health isn't helpful because they don't really understand depression or what's anxiety or anything. So they just think that it's easy, you can just think it away, or it's just something you could fix really easily if you just don't think about it.
And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that reminder, that we have to have those tough conversations in our community. Just a reminder, we do have the 988 crisis and suicide hotline that's available for anyone looking for help. 211 is also a good resource for mental health services. If you call 211, they could be able to connect you with the right people in our community. And our Latino Commission also does a lot of work in mental health in the community. But thank you again for starting that conversation here with us. Appreciate it. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I do echo your comments about the wonderful women on Team Indio that make this machine roll. So thank you for those comments, and thank you to all of those that serve. Just wanted to thank everybody also for the patience as we're out there paving. Mr. Wassel and his team and our contractors are out doing a lot of work. That does require some patience. I know Jefferson's been very difficult lately. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. It'll be another handful of days, and some of that work will be done, and we'll move on to another location. So thank the community for the patience. We're in full festival swing as we get close to those, and I also appreciate patience as we move forward on those. In between, we will have Cella again downtown. So the free event called Cella will be on April 19th. We also have a council meeting that night, so I guess we can all move from here to celebrate that event. We also have a second Saturday next month. That's on April 8th. And as requested, Chief Washburn and his team will provide a report on the homelessness efforts at next City Council meeting, April 5th. So those that may want to be in attendance or view that, please put that on your calendar for the next council meeting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager. We'll move on to reports on external and internal boards. Councilmember Holmes?
Okay, sure. So the first one of the meetings I had was the CV Mountains Conservancy, and that's always very interesting to me because it really tries to preserve lands for the future, for future generations, and I think that's very important. So two things of note. We adopted a resolution providing local assistance in terms of a grant to the Living Desert Zoo and Gardens, and it's part of the San Felipe Creek Desert Pupfish Refuge and Wildlife Project. And it's right on the Living Desert grounds, and the Living Desert Zoo and Gardens is really committed to ensuring that everyone everywhere has embraced the importance of sustainability and conservation, and really trying to ensure that all components, including the desert pupfish, are preserved. So that was a $60,500 grant. The other thing that I thought was of particular importance is they have something, we talked about something called JEDI. And what that stands for is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Policy. And so, we've really spent the last several months really looking and trying to understand what that means and how we as a board and an organization ensure that we follow that. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of an excerpt here because I think it speaks to it. We have a commitment to expand our ability to support underserved communities and ultimately enhance the implementation of our mission. So it's meaningful community engagement, working with tribes, tribal communities, maintaining a diverse staff with relevant skills to reach these communities and the underserved communities, and accountability and transparency in our operations. And so a term was used, embedding equity. And there's 6 guidelines, which I won't go through, but I think what's really important is that we really spent a lot of time looking at justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. What does it mean, and what does it mean for our organization? So we are continuing, that'll continue to be a work in progress and review. The other things that I wanted to talk about, attended second Saturday. Hey, folks out in the audience, we need to get you out there. It's fun. I know it's a little windy out there, but it's fun. And you need to come out and enjoy the music and support everything that's going on for second Saturdays. Farmers Market on Sunday again. I was out there Sunday. My husband and I really enjoyed it. We sat out there, had my usual, if you've seen my posts, I live for pastries and coffee. And we got to sit out there for a couple of hours, enjoy a beautiful day, and the farmers market and the people. Attended the Women's Club luncheon. Councilmember Miller was one of our oh-so-handsome ushers, and it was a very sort of formal 50s-oriented theme. But it was a lot of fun, but at the end of the day, the focus was that it raised money. It was a fundraiser for scholarships, and that was the most important. I think this was one of our, I don't have the exact numbers yet, but most successful events. And let's see. Oh, and we had the Taste of Indio at the Coachella Valley History Museum by the Greater Coachella Valley Chamber of Commerce. Got there a little bit late, but even then, there were a lot of people there. And it was nice. I think 1 or 2 of the restaurants sold out, so that's always kind of good to hear that that's their jackalope. They're coming to town, I promise. They were there. They served up some very good queso. I mean, it was just absolutely outstanding. So very exciting to see the crowds, the energy, and the interest. And that's what I did in the last couple of weeks. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Holmes. Councilmember Furman.
All righty. Good evening, everyone, and joining us. Well, I had a couple of meetings, and I'll start off with my Riverside County Transportation Commission meeting, which was a very exciting meeting. We had a very, very important item on the agenda, and all I have to say is Monroe Bridge interchange. And I think we could we can all understand the challenges we have there. But, you know, I have to stress to the community that these large capital improvement projects are not just funded by the city of Indio, our partners. It takes a lot of money in funding for these $100 million projects, correct, Mr. Wasso? And so this effort has been going on since 2007. So this is not something that's just the last couple of years we decided to start working on. This thing has been in motion since 2007. And at this last meeting, the commission approved programming for $26,232,000 of grant funding for the I-10 Monroe Street Interchange project. So we have light at the end of the tunnel, to see this project come to fruition here soon. So thank you to everyone who's been part of this. Mr. Wasso, very humble man, but he has worked night and day on these projects, along with everything else that's going on in the city. So this is really good news for us to see this funding come through for the Transportation Commission. Also, I attended the League of California Cities Riverside County Division meeting in Cathedral City this past week. We had a great evening. Hats off to Cathedral City on their new amphitheater. It makes me think about our downtown living room what we're working on. And so we're also waiting on ours to come through the pipeline. And so that's really exciting news on top of other projects that we have going on downtown. So that was a really good meeting. We had a update on the future of transportation in our county, along with our valley from RCTC, along with CB Rail. And currently right now with the CB Rail project, we're waiting for funding, actually a grant, a federal grant that will get us out of Tier 2. And that grant is up to $20 million, I believe. So once we clear Tier 2, we can start talking about where the stops are gonna be and throughout the valley. And so we're still moving along. So we'll have word on the grant in June of this year. So June comes, I should have a idea if we got that grant. Also, I participated in the Read Across America this year. I was at Kennedy Elementary School, and some of us here in this room, including myself, went to Kennedy. So nice school, nice new campus. Hats off to Desert Sands Unified School District, their staff over there. Great day, great event with the kids. And I still had a couple of our State of the City cereal boxes from the city. So I took the kids some treats, and they really enjoyed it. But, you know, it was amazing. I went for Read Across America, and I would have first graders. But they had questions about what's going on in the city. These kids are really sharp these days. So I was able to give them an update on the city. And then I proceeded to have a conversation with one young man who his teacher said he's probably going to take your seat one day on the council. He asked me, how old is Indio? When was Indio, when was Indio born? And I said, well, you know, we're approximately 93 years old. It was when it was incorporated. And then he asked me about Native Americans. And I said, well, you know what? I'm gonna jog my comment back. I said, the natives were here first. We came in and we worked with them on water and the resources they had through the rail, and then Indio was incorporated. So Indio was here, and it was actually called Indian Wells. And so the teacher was very impressed with the students. So good conversation, but it also let me know, reminded me that, yeah, we were incorporated at a certain time, but our natives were here. So it was good to show appreciation and educate the students on that. And so that concludes my comments, but I do, actually, no, that's another comment. Sorry, that will conclude my comments, Mr. Mayor. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Furman. Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Only one of my committees was active. Ray Trejo and I attended the ECAC, which is part of the IID board for the Coachella Valley. Pretty much a standard meeting. First time back, you know, with the new rules, so we were actually in person for the first time in their campus in La Quinta. We talked about microgrids. They're making a setup for doing microgrids because of the city of Indio is going to have one of the first microgrids in the IID territory. So they were talking about how they were going to move forward with new microgrids as that one came forward. So it was very interesting to hear that it was actually coming from here in the city of Indio. Also talked about the summer rates. Each year they try and adjust rates based on use so that the summer times it's not as expensive during as it is for them. So they try and blend it over the other months. That's winter time where they don't use as much. This year they're going to go ahead and pretty much go straight forward, and whatever your charges are, and they'll work for you. They have opportunities for grants for seniors and people of low income, and also for veterans and that. So there's opportunities if you ever want to get an IID website that has rebates, that has opportunities for grants, and also if you need some help with your bill, they'll be able to help support you on that. And then lastly on it, they were talking about LAFCO, which is the land use industry that works with the cities and the counties and that to develop our lines where our borders are. And that because of the end of the contract with CVWD and the cities here in the Coachella Valley on power, they had to go back to LAFCO to look at, see what they needed to do to be able to continue to have those lines. So we'll hear more about that very shortly. I did attend a couple events too in the great city here, the Indio Women's Club. They've been around for 100 years. Great group of individuals that continue to support our valley. I was lucky to be an usher with them. I am a member of their club, but you know, they do so much for our valley. If you're not a member of the Women's Club of Indio, you should check them out. All the money that was made at this Roaring 50s fundraiser goes to scholarships for young ladies that want to go to college, read with me for books, and then also the Affiliate Project. So great organization that's given back to our community. I also read across America, but I was at Andrew Jackson Elementary School and read a few books on Dr. Seuss. And you're very right. The young kids there are very active in what's going on in our city. So it's great to hear, and I was able to read to 3rd and 5th graders. The Taste of Indio, I want to thank the Greater Coachella Valley Chamber of Commerce and the City of Indio. At the History Museum, also, what a great spot to have our restaurants. Jackalope Ranch, a lot of our other restaurants were there. Great to see all the people, not only to highlight downtown and what's going on there, but also to get our residents and other people into our downtown area to see our little gem, the History Museum, and also get some great food from the restaurants. And then lastly, I was at the Boys and Girls Club, the gala. They had it this Saturday night. They were honoring the Bianco family, who has the grapes out here. Great group of individuals, family that's helped the Boys and Girls Club and so many other organizations out here. And the gala raised $1.5 million for the Boys and Girls Clubs out here in the Coachella Valley. So great to do that. And then one serious note I'd like to do a little bit. We had another horrific accident on Jefferson and Fred Waring again. People are just running those lights. We really need to look at our speeds and get our traffic organizations and police officers back up, because people are in a hurry. Because of the construction in other areas throughout, not just the city, but the valley, people are running stop signs, they're running lights, and we need to slow people down, and we need to do one thing that I give the county credit for, and Indian Wells and Palm Desert, is if you're going down Fred Waring where they're always speeding, there's always a motorcycle police officer somewhere there. You always know they're there, and so in the back of your mind, you do it. We really need to slow people down. It was a terrible accident. So
do you know if we have cameras there?
I know we do have cameras. I looked at the new CV synchronization program that's up above where my office is, and I saw that, and we do have cameras there, but it's just, I live there at Heritage Palms, and every day people they push one extra car, one extra car. And I think what this was doing is the car was coming through. I didn't see the accident, but by the way it looks, I'm sure the chief can. We just got to slow people down. We got to get people to follow the rules. One loss of a life is just one too many. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't have any committees this past couple of weeks. I just wanted to make an announcement, and it's on the city website. The Coachella Valley Model Railroaders Club, they permanently have their exhibit at the fairgrounds in one of the front buildings. On April 1st, they're going to open it up to the community from 10 to 2. It's on a Saturday, and admission is free. You can enter off of the fairground entrance on Highway 111. And it's really an interesting exhibit, especially for the youth in our community who don't really know the history of Indio, because Indio is depicted in that small little miniature railroad city. They have our original Southern Pacific Railroad station. They have our original Southern Pacific stop. They have downtown Fargo Street, which was one of our original commerce streets. There's quite a bit of interesting history in that little model railroaders exhibit. So if you have an open Saturday, April 1st from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., absolutely free at the fairgrounds, the Coachella Valley Model Railroaders. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Let's see. This month I had the opportunity to visit John Glenn Middle School and Jefferson Middle School for their career day, where we talked about our work here at the city and about going to college, getting jobs, and they had a lot of really good questions, so we had a pretty good time. One of the questions that I had them was guess how much the Monroe Bridge was going to cost to replace. Closest guess I got was $10 million, but so I told them 90 million. They just blew their minds, so that was good. I also recently had 2 meetings with Southern California Association of Governments. We had a joint policy meeting where we discussed the Connect SoCal plan. This is a plan that covers a region of 19 million people and plans for our investment as a region into areas like housing, transportation, energy, and climate resilience. We also had a regional council meeting where we discussed issues at the Port of Los Angeles. They've made some progress there, reducing their emissions from 2005 to 2021. They've reduced diesel particulate matter by 86%. They've reduced nitrogen oxides by 46% and sulfur oxides by 95%. So we are seeing some progress. The issues that they saw was that they've been having issues since the pandemic. Dwell time is how long a container sits at the port. So before, it was usually less than 3 days that a container would sit there. During that pandemic, that went up to 6 days in 2021 and 8 days in 2022. Over 50% of them were there for 5 days. So what that does is it really starts delaying all of the business out here and transportation of goods. And so we're seeing that a lot of business started moving to the East Coast. So we're seeing New Jersey ports, we're getting more business than LA for the first time in decades. And so that's creating some issues here for our businesses and for revenues in our region. So they're looking for new solutions and also looking at all the regulations that are coming in with the zero emission vehicles from the state, seeing how they're going to be able to keep up with that, because there's just not enough innovation so far, but they are working on the new hydrogen trucks, battery trucks. They were showing some of those as well. So they're looking at how to bring that business back up. We also had a tour with SCAG, the Sunline Hydrogen Production Facility. One new technology I saw there was that they were able to produce hydrogen straight from natural gas. And this is from a chemical reaction where they were able to separate carbon atoms from hydrogen atoms and produce that fuel. This new technology does have some emissions, but I would like to see how that compares to other forms of renewable energy and even other forms of production of hydrogen where electricity is used. We also had a tour of CVWD and saw their control center in Palm Desert and some of their percolation ponds out there where they refill the aquifer. One thing that did come up, which was a bit concerning, was that they've stopped refilling the aquifer temporarily at the Tommy's Levee reclamation site because of the concerns at the Colorado River. And this is what we've been worried about because that is what refills our drinking supply. So once again, I think we need to enhance our water conservation efforts, and I know our water department is up on that, and we're working together to find some new solutions here. So with that, I do have a few requests on the water side. I would like to see if we could discuss a new landscaping ordinance for new developments to include drought-tolerant landscaping, as well as adding some tree canopy in their landscaping designs. I know we've been recommending this to a lot of businesses, but I would really like to set it in stone and put those requirements down. Another thing that I would like to direct staff to is to bring us some options in our budget discussions later on this year or in a few months to talk about enhancing our turf removal program. We've had some discussions about it already, but to bring that conversation in our budget discussion to see if we can set aside some more money for those turf removal programs and get more accurate with our canopy, improving our canopy with that landscaping program as well. Another item I would like to bring back is land acknowledgement, and this is something that is added to our agendas for city meetings and important events, and this is a way to pay respect to our tribes and the people who took care of this land before we were here. It's a great way to build a better relationship with our tribes and increase the awareness in our community, as Mr. Furman was saying, of our history and our tribal history here in Indio. So looking to see if I have support from council on those 3 items.
I think you have to break them down again.
Sure. So the first one is discussing the landscaping ordinance for any new developments to include drought-tolerant landscaping and adding some tree canopy into those developments.
And I'm fine with that, but I thought we already had an ordinance. I swear I sat here years ago and we did that.
There is one, we could present it, maybe email it for any comments and suggestions, and then you could comment on whether you'd want it updated or not. So there is one in place. The general plan articulates some of that as well. It's how you might want to enhance it or not.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a problem enhancing. I think, Ray, we got to make a palette, which I think we do, but the other thing too is once you start adding trees into it, it affects sidewalks and other stuff, so it's got to be the proper tree in the proper place and that. So there's a lot that goes to it, so we can always enhance it. I'm good with enhancing it.
Okay. And the second one was just to bring back in our budget discussions a conversation about enhancing our turf removal program.
That's fine, that happens anyway.
Okay. And the third one is the land acknowledgement.
Don't understand.
I'm not sure what you want to do, but there's something connected to this that I need to bring Bryan up to speed on, but what do you mean by it?
So land acknowledgement, it's been done throughout the country already, but it's kind of like when you set the invocation part of the agenda. It's a place where you kind of state the history of this land and acknowledge the tribes that were here before we were here and pay respects to that.
So it's like a paragraph you read or something?
Yeah.
Every time? Or just-
Every
or
meeting.
once? Every meeting?
Well, he could do it,
meeting.
it's a mayoral privilege.
Yeah.
He can add that to the agenda.
And
It's your privilege.
And it could be in print
Yeah.
there on each agenda, whether
Right.
you read it every
Right.
time or not, I
Yeah.
guess it'd
So
be
you
the,
can work with staff on that.
Okay, I'm
That's up
fine
to
with
you.
that, yeah.
But Bryan, I do need to bring you up to speed with something with the tribes and the way we work on mitigating artifacts when we do the
Archaeology.
archaeology things. Yeah.
All right, that's all I have. So thank you. We'll move on to our next item, which is excusing our Youth Advisory Council. Would you like to be excused?
They don't want to go.
They're not ready.
They don't want to go.
All
They
right,
want to
we'll
stay.
keep them here for today. No, I'm just kidding.
We'll be excused, thank you.
All right, thank
Bye.
you. Appreciate you. Good
Turned
videos
on
too.
me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye. And we'll move on to the consent calendar. Is there any items anybody would like to pull?
Yes, I like to pull 10.1.
10.1, let's see. Okay, what would you like to?
Well, I'd like to go back to the minutes from our last meeting. And Mr. Graham, if I'm incorrect in anything I proceed with, just please correct me. We had an item in our minutes that was under administrative for 10.3, which was the Indio Second Entry Gateway Project, to select one artist and proposal from the 10 proposals submitted. And this art project was located at the corner of Jackson and Kenner for a total amount of $125,000. Well, we voted on moving the project to the sports park, and I did vote yes on that. And I wanted to know if I could change my vote on that
So you wanted to change your vote to a no?
to a no.
So in order to change the vote on an item that you've already approved, you need to make a motion to reconsider. That's something that we could put on the agenda for a future meeting. Motions to reconsider to change your vote, you have to suspend the rules. So you're going to need 2/3 of the council to vote to suspend the rules. Then you need a motion to reconsider.
Sorry, I think the meetings might just be off, right? Did you vote yes? or no?
It's not going
You
to.
voted yes, but
It's
you
not
want
going
to
to
vote no.
change. It's not going to
Oh,
change.
well, then if it's not going to change the result, can't
It's
we
not
just
gonna
do a
change it.
minute order? that-
Yeah.
To let the minutes reflect that council
That it's gonna
member
change my
Mayor
vote.
Furman voted yes on that item, but would like, the changed his, he doesn't want to officially take back the vote. Because he's not going to
I'd just
change
like
the
If you
It's
want
result.
to put
gonna
an
change.
asterisk on the minutes that say at this meeting, you
Yeah.
indicated that you would like, you no longer support that.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's what
But
I
that,
meant.
but that won't change the official vote.
It's not going to change the vote. It's just my looking at this item is, okay, it's a desert tortoise, which we love. We all said we loved it. We didn't like the location. However, I just think that the Indio Sports Park should be sports. I think we could look around the city. We could look at other locations in the Old North Indio area. Me personally, when I look back, if we're going to do Indio Sports Park, I want to do Indio Sports Park. And as a council, we voted to move it to the sports park. My change in my vote won't change it, but that's just, I just feel that it's not the right place for it.
We can add an asterisk to the minutes indicating you no longer support it.
That's fine. And that's my
Thank you.
only thing, Mr. Mayor. Other than that, I'm fine.
I wanted to just get a short presentation on 10.7 for the housing element. And sorry, I didn't give you guys a heads up this time. It's a little busy day, but I did want to just go over it with the community as well to show them the progress that we're making here.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of City Council. Kevin Snyder, Director of Community Development. Joining me is Jesus Gomez, our Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager. As the Mayor indicated, this item is the city's annual housing element report. We are required by state law to report progress on our implementation of our housing element. As the council is aware, in 2022, you adopted a new housing element for the city. That came with a variety of actions, 37 in total, and with various timelines and commitment of resources and energy. So that report is something that we are required to submit to the State Office of Housing and Community Development each year by April 1st. And it was prepared by Mr. Gomez. And it is actually a very detailed form that we have to fill out. It's their form, not ours. And we have to report certain data as it relates to housing production, as well as any inconsistencies in our housing element implementation. Happy to provide more detail. I would invite Mr. Gomez up to provide that since he prepared the report. But if the mayor or council has any other questions, we're happy to respond.
I think I'm looking for the numbers on where we're at compared to our arena numbers.
Good evening, and thank you very much. Jesus Gomez, Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager, and I will just give you a quick overview of some of the numbers that are included in this annual progress report, as well as is summarized in the staff report. And the members of the community can see that report for themselves as well. One of the things that this report does is we report on the number of units that were usually permitted, because that goes towards meeting our regional housing needs allocation, which is a system that keeps track of how many affordable housing units are being permitted in the system, in the city. This system is used by HCD, or the state agency that governs housing development in California, and all cities and counties are required to meet these RHNA housing allocations. And so there's categories that range from extremely low to very low, upwards to above and moderate income. And so what our report shows for the calendar year 2021 is that we permitted 857 new units, of which 44 were very low income units that were restricted to be rented by affordable housing persons of low income, of very low incomes, of 50% area median income or lower. And 170 units were for those households that were considered of very low income, which is 80,000 of the area median income. These are categories that designate households by income earnings for the year. And then there was a 645 above moderate housing units, and these are typically the single-family development units that we see in our city. In the developments that come in, and those are single lot developments for home ownership. The ones I mentioned were very low and low income units. Those were apartments that were permitted for the year. Again, part of the affordable housing production in our city. Additional things that we report on is our activities. So for example, in the report, we did a report that not included in those permitted units were 2 phases of a new construction project that's being developed, known as the Arroyo Crossing on Jefferson and Highway 111. And those has 2 phases. It's currently under construction. Construction did start during that reporting period, so we do include that. But those are not counted in the reporting of these new units. Those were reported in the prior housing element. Oh. And so this report shows some of these activities as well. We also, as you know, we presented the council, I believe, the last council meeting or 2 ago, the pro-housing strategies plan, which is we're trying to seek a designation that through the state to be considered a pro-housing designated city, which would allow us to receive incentives and compete for funding at the state level for funding to the city or for development projects here in partnership with affordable housing developers. So those are some of the summaries of the report.
Thank you. One thing I did notice was that we haven't had any moderate income units added. Is there any strategies that we're looking at now or any future projects that are going to be adding units to that area?
Sure. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to jump in because this is the topic of the missing middle housing that we've talked a lot with council recently. We do have a large project that is being proposed that will address the missing middle housing in terms of rental. There's a relatively new phenomenon for California, but it's going great guns in our neighboring state of Arizona called build-to-rent housing. And this is permanent build-to-rent housing, single-family housing that will be built. It will look like a single-family neighborhood, but it will be operated like rental housing, rental apartments. There's approximately 1,200 units that are being proposed in North Indio, and that's making its way through a specific plan approval process that will ultimately come to the City Council for your consideration and review. So that is one area that we are addressing the missing middle housing. Several of the strategies that you looked at as part of the pro-housing designation discussion when we had with you a few weeks back would also look to tackle that by looking to leverage funding sources to support that. Oftentimes, the missing middle housing challenge is that the resources for some of the more challenging aspects of development, particularly infrastructure, aren't always available. So having that pro-housing designation would help the city perhaps compete more successfully for funding through available state funding programs, grants, and other programs that are available to the city.
Okay, thank you. You know, in the build-to-rent issue, and I did see some details about that project, and just brainstorming, you know, I was thinking it seems like a solution for people who can't get a mortgage, right? They'd be able to rent a home, but then on the other hand, thinking about it, that's a lot of money that's leaving our community, right? That's not building wealth in ownership. That's not the same way that a mortgage would benefit our community. So, but just, I know it's not coming up yet, but just something for us to think about here.
And I would say, Mayor, I think the city has done a really good job in looking at, you've spent a lot of energy looking at the topic of different housing product type. Mm-hmm. And I think this is part of that solution, but not the only solution. So ownership product type that is more diversified. For example, we have a project in central Indio called Palmera that came to you not too long ago for a tentative track map, and that project has for rent and for sale townhomes, for example. So diversifying the housing product type in our city, I think, gets to the point you're raising, which is we need multiple avenues of housing delivery in our city.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yes. Appreciate it. Any other questions? No? Everybody good? All right. Thank you.
I'll make a motion then to accept the consent calendar as amended on item 10.1 with the note of Councilmember Furman on his vote for the art project.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Councilmember Miller and a second from Councilmember Holmes. Let's go ahead and vote here. Vote passes 5-0. Thank you. We'll move on to our administrative items. We have 11.1, our independent auditor's report by Mr. Rob Rockwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Rob Rockwell, Assistant City Manager, Director of Finance, City Treasurer. I would like to invite up and introduce you to Ryan Domino. Ryan works for the auditing firm Lansell Longhard, and he will be providing you a report on the city's financial statements for fiscal year 21-22.
Thank you and good evening. It's a pleasure to be out here with you this evening to go over the results of our annual financial audit. This is I believe the 6th year that my firm has worked with the city now, conducting the financial audit. And once again, just in short, before I get into the presentation, it was another good year, good clean audit. So I'll dive into the details and kind of talk about what we did, the results, and what it all means. Okay, so as an overview, we have been engaged by the city to perform a financial audit over the basic financial statements. We conducted this audit last year over a period of 2 weeks. The first week occurred May 5th, and that is when we look at the city's policies, procedures, and internal controls, and offer feedback and making sure all the numbers that are being generated at that point are being done so in a good and correct manner. And then finally, we came back, I guess virtually, the week of October 10th to actually dive into the final numbers and make sure that the amounts that are presented in the financial statements are supported and correct. And the whole goal of a financial audit is to render an opinion as to whether or not those financial statements are reliable for decision-making and compliance purposes with the bond covenants, grantor agencies, etc. Whenever I give one of these presentations, I always like to go over real briefly what an audit is not. There's two big misconceptions out there about what me as the independent auditor looks for. And the first one is a financial audit is not primarily a search for fraud or theft or embezzlement, those types of things. As the financial auditor, I'm required to be aware of it. I'm supposed to keep it in mind and report on it if I were to come across anything or if it were to be brought to my attention. But I'm not out there looking for fraud specifically. The second thing that I'm not doing is I'm not offering an opinion on whether or not the financial results of the city improved or got worse over the past year. So if revenues went up, that's great, but from my perspective, I'm not reporting on whether or not that's a positive or not. The only time I'm required to report on the financial health of the city is if, in our opinion, there's a significant risk that within the next 12 months, the city could endure a significant financial catastrophe. Call that going concern. So diving into the results of the audit, this is included in your annual comprehensive financial report as the first letter in the financial section of that report. We rendered an unmodified opinion, which is, like I said earlier, the best opinion and highest opinion the profession allows us to render. We completed our audit on February 24th of this year. And what that means is the financial statements are accurate and reliable as of June 30, 2022. And we conducted our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, which is kind of the baseline that every auditor in every industry conducts their audits with, but also with government auditing standards, which is a higher level of auditing requirements that governmental agencies are required to undergo. Just a little bit of some of my responsibilities as the auditor is I'm obtaining reasonable but not absolute assurance that the financial statements are accurate and free from material misstatement. What that means is I don't test 100% of all the transactions. There are professional standards that guide the use of sampling or determining which transactions are material or significant to be tested. If I were to test every transaction, the audit would probably still be ongoing. So have to pick and choose where the risks are at and respond accordingly. Other things we do is we obtain an understanding of the internal control environment here at the city and design audit procedures to respond to any deficiencies that we would find potentially or any areas that we deem to be riskier and require more attention. We also evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies or procedures used by the city. Make sure they're in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles as well as other government industry specific standards. Like I mentioned earlier, we also evaluate the city for a going concern doubt, which would basically be, are they going to continue as an entity for the next 12 months or so? Okay, the next report that we issue, and this is the one that is required by government auditing standards, requires us to disclose to you any sort of significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the internal control structure, or if we were to come across any sort of material non-compliance with laws, regulations, grant agreements, various other items like that. And I'm pleased to report we had no findings for fiscal year 2022. So it's a good, short, sweet, and clean letter. And then finally, the other required communication that we provide to you is called our auditor communication or Statement of Accounting Standards 114 letter. And this letter is more or less just a written summary of this presentation. It explains any sort of significant accounting practices used by the city. For this year, the only thing really to highlight that's new is the change in the lease accounting standards that took effect this past year, called GASB 87. You'll notice probably a few new line items on the financial statement related to the leasing activities. That's not specific to Indio, but every government across the entire United States implemented that standard this past year. The other significant item in there is just the estimates that are involved in creating the net pension liability and the net other post-employment benefits liabilities. The city has actuaries that assist with the other post-employment benefits, and then CalPERS provides the information for the pension liability. As far as significant or unusual transactions, we didn't note any that occurred this past year, and we had no difficulties conducting our audit. We had no misstatements that needed to be corrected, and we had no disagreements with management regarding the application of accounting principles. So, again, a fairly uneventful letter and a clean audit. So, just in summary, it was a good audit, clean, unmodified opinion. We had no findings related to noncompliance or internal controls. We had no significant audit adjustments that were required to get the financial statements corrected, and we had no difficulties conducting our audit. So just in conclusion, I do want to extend my thanks to the finance team here for all their help and support in getting us the supporting documents we need to conduct the audit and get it concluded for you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Any questions? No questions? Thank you. All right, thanks.
All right, thank you.
And I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
I just need to get the words out. I was going to thank our finance director, treasurer, assistant city manager, because this happened as a result of your effort. Thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Oh,
Department.
yep.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes. I can't find the words.
I'll make
Let's
a
see.
motion.
Go ahead.
Recommend and receive and file the City of Indio's annual comprehensive financial report for the year ending June 30th, 2022.
I'll second that.
There you go.
We have a motion from Councilmember Miller and a second from Councilmember Furman. Let's go ahead and vote. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. And we'll move on to 11.2, Professional Services Agreement with Dudek for Sphere of Influence Services. We have Mr. Snyder. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Kevin Snyder, Director of Community Development. This item before you this evening, item 11.2, pertains to a professional services agreement with Dudek. That name may be familiar to you because they've recently helped us with our housing element update and also some projects in the past, including our Transformative Climate Communities Plan. This item this evening is relating to a potential adjustment to what is called a sphere of influence. And I'm going to just take a moment to explain this, but first to orient you. The area we're talking about is 231 acres, and this is an area that is bounded on the north by Avenue 50, on the west by Jackson, on the south by Avenue 52, and on the east by Calhoun. This area has the distinction of being between the cities of Indio and the city of Indio and Coachella. However, it is not within the sphere of influence of either city, and it is unincorporated Riverside County. So a sphere of influence is basically the future extent of the physical boundaries of the city, basically a technical way to say where the city's going to grow to. The thing about sphere of influences is they're never truly static because they can be changed and modified. In some instances, they can be pulled back. In this instance, we're talking about the potential idea of extending the city's sphere of influence to include this approximately 231 acres. So there is a process that you have to go through to do this. The Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO, Riverside County LAFCO in this instance, has a process by which you can go through and request consideration of modifying your community's sphere of influence to include additional lands. LAFCO has to approve it, and they do have several steps and significant amount of documentation that has to be done, resulting in the need for consultant assistance. That's why we're bringing this consultant agreement before you this evening. So the consultant agreement is for the amount of $96,342.50. That is going to help us with preparing documentation for amending our general plan and also doing what's called pre-zoning. So if you look at our general plan today, you'll see the sphere of influence for the city in different parts of our city. this area is not included. We would have to go through and modify our general plan, and we'd also have to identify the future zoning of this area in order to satisfy LAFCO requirements. There's also requirement for CEQA documentation in the California Environmental Quality Act to ensure that we're meeting statutory standards around environmental documentation. There's requirements for community engagement and significant mapping. So we believe that based on work that has been done to date in discussing this area both with the City of Coachella, the Riverside County LAFCO staff and board, and also with residents of the area, that there is an inherent public interest in the City of Indio exploring, including this area within our sphere of influence. Now, we are aware that the City of Coachella is also exploring the potential for asking the Riverside County LAFCO Commission to include it in its sphere of influence. However, we do not know the extent of that work or where they're at, but we do know that we do have work to do, and that work will require the significant documentation I just talked about. So there are basically two options for the council to consider this evening. If you agree as a majority that we should do this work, then we're asking you to approve the professional services agreement. If, however, you don't believe as a majority that this is an important effort on part of the city to include this in our sphere of influence, then you simply don't need to approve the professional services agreement. So with that, the staff recommendation is if you desire to bring it into the city, this area into the city, at least through the initial step of identifying and including in the city's sphere of influence, then we recommend that you approve the professional services agreement with Dudek in the amount of $96,342.50. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that council might have.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any questions?
I don't have any questions. I just want to add on to his report. When this topic came to fruition, a few months, right? A lot of the residents contacted me and wanted to know if we were in the talks with this property, and we hadn't been notified. And so we did some local outreach, very elementary, but it was overwhelmingly that the residents would like Indio to at least have a conversation or pursue this property. So I don't know if we have a motion yet, but I just think, general rule of thumb, we're not going to give up any land, but we could also take some, So I'd be willing to make a motion if no one else has any conversation about this.
I think my only question, before we make the investment is, why are we confident that this will go our way instead of Coachella's?
I think confidence might be the wrong word, Mayor, if I could. I believe that the City of Indio will have to prepare the necessary documentation. We will have to make our case. However, we do have close proximity. There is availability of public services provided by the city, both on the infrastructure side and in public safety services. And as the council member indicated, we have had several significant conversations with residents in the area, not all residents, but many of them, who have expressed an interest in potentially becoming part of the City of Indio. So we think that based on those factors, we have a reasonably good case to make to the LAFCO board, and we hope that, and again, if you do approve this, we would hope that they would agree. I want to remind the council and the community that the sphere of influence is the first step. That doesn't mean that it comes into the city. There's a whole separate step you have to do called annexation, and that's a whole separate process. We're just talking about sphere of influence, but we believe we have a very reasonable, factually based argument to make to the LAFCO Commission, as well as the community, as to what the benefits are for being potentially part of the City of Indio.
Okay, thank you.
And the service agreement would commence that process, correct?
This is a necessary step to help this conversation with the LAFCO board and ultimately any decision they might issue.
And I think it's pertinent that we do it. I agree with Councilman Furman. There's a lot of the residents there that would prefer to come into the City of Indio because of what our public safety is and our services as a city as a whole. And at the same time, it will enhance our area around the polo grounds.
Yeah.
That will be able to, not affect them as much. We will be able to talk to them and discuss it. And I think they see that as a very good positive step for them and their properties and to get the best value and the best use of their properties. So I think it's pertinent that we do it. So I'll yield to Councilmember Furman.
So I'll move, if the council desires to bring this area into the formal sphere of influence and eventually annex it, approve the professional service agreement with Dudek for sphere of influence services in the amount of $96,342.50 to obtain the sphere of influence designation for certain real properties south of Avenue 50, north of Avenue 52, east of Jackson, and west of Calhoun Street, and authorize city manager and city attorney to execute said agreement.
I'll second that.
We have a motion from Councilmember Furman and a second from Councilmember Holmes. Go ahead and vote. Vote passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. And we'll move on to item 11.3, urgency ordinance number 1791, an interim measure imposing a moratorium on the use, construction, establishment, or operation of new self-storage facilities. And we have Mr. Snyder again.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the City Council, again, Kevin Snyder, Director of Community Development. Waiting for the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so this item this evening is a potential action consideration by the City Council. It's on a unique topic, and the unique topic is the topic of a moratorium. Now, Council has experienced and gone through the moratorium process in the past, so in some ways this is not new, but this is new for a particular topical area. In many instances, staff initiates the discussion through Council direction on potential policy considerations by the Planning Commission. In this instance, the Planning Commission asked for a discussion and the potential consideration of a recommendation to City Council on the issue of self-storage facilities, mini storage facilities, and recreational vehicle storage facilities in the City of Indio. They were concerned, and the concern simply came down to they were seeing a number of applications coming into the city, and they wondered why there were so many coming in and what was the overall impact to the city. So that began a conversation that culminated on February 8th when they made a recommendation to you as a body on a 5-0 motion vote to recommend the potential adoption of a moratorium. So what is a moratorium? And I should note that before that action on February 8th, there were several conversations leading up to that in December and January. So there was several opportunities for the commission to talk with the public, to talk amongst themselves and with staff. So a moratorium is authorized by the state. It, in essence, my term, I call it a legislative pause. There is an issue that may come up in a community that the leadership of that community believes warrants some additional policy analysis and consideration. And so in that vein, the state has given local governments the opportunity to take that legislative pause. And what that does is it allows that development applications, the processing of those or the consideration of those may be temporarily halted while that policy conversation occurs. And there is a formalized process that one has to go through for that. It requires action by the legislative body, in this case the City Council. It requires a 4/5 vote. And it's for an initial period of 45 days. Prior to the end of that 45 days, we have to come back to the City Council. You have to discuss whether or not you want to consider that moratorium, and it has to be done in a public hearing format. So there's a very established process to do this. It is done in a manner that gives an initial conversation period, and then you as the legislative body decide if you want to continue that conversation. If you don't decide to continue that conversation, then the moratorium ends and we go about business as usual. So this topic has come up before. We most recently had that conversation with you around the issue of these kind of facilities when we were looking at the adoption of the Unified Development Code. And at that time, the council adopted a requirement that new facilities had to have fronting commercial or office uses with the storage facilities behind them. In most areas of the city, you did grant an exception if my position felt that there was market factors that limited the opportunity to have those commercial office or retail facilities present, then I could potentially, or my position could potentially exclude that from the requirement. But generally, you took an initial action to try to mitigate some of the impacts of these type of facilities, and I'll talk about those potential impacts in a second, through the adoption of the Unified Development Code standards. So what did the commission consider when they were talking? They had a number of considerations. We have 13 existing facilities in the city. We have 4 pending approvals that are going through the city's land use entitlement process. We have 3 facilities that have received their land use entitlements and are going through the building or engineering approval process. We received 9 inquiries for additional potential storage facilities in 2022. Around us in the other cities and unincorporated Riverside County, there's a total of 9 facilities. So you can see that the Indio has become a destination, if you will, for these type of facilities, and that was a particular concern to the commission in terms of the number of existing facilities and the potential new number of facilities coming into the city. There was concern about the limited economic benefit to the city. Typically, these facilities generate limited property taxes, limited sales taxes, and often, in many instances, limited employment generation. Because of technology, some of these facilities are 100% automated, so there is no employment generated from them. And then the final consideration the Commission had was around the fact that we have a very limited supply of light industrial and heavy industrial land in the city. This is not a new topic for the Council. We discussed this when we adopted the general plan in September 2019. We have about 519 acres of total industrial land in the city. And that land is for a city of this size, that's not a lot of land set aside for those type of potential light industrial, heavy industrial uses that often can lead to potential property tax or significant employment generation. So if the council was to consider the moratorium, and I do want to emphasize a moratorium is a short-term action. It is not intended to be a long-term way to manage land uses. The state law discourages that. I believe this council in the past has also discouraged that because you understand that ultimately the policy decision has to be answered. So if the council took any action this evening to adopt a moratorium, it would be for a short-term period to allow the council, the planning commission, the community, and staff to have a thoughtful and engaging policy discussion and ultimately bring something back to the city council for your consideration. So right now, self-storage facilities, mini storage facilities, recreational facilities, storage facilities, all are about storage areas for personal or real property. It can be furniture, clothes, your RV, your four-wheeler. These are places that are developed in order for individuals to be able to utilize them for storage of personal property. If the moratorium was enacted by you this evening, it would not apply in a couple of instances. One, the legally existing facilities we just talked about. It would not apply to them. Two, facilities that have not been completed but that either have a vesting tentative map, a development agreement, or for which a building permit has been issued and substantial progress has been made, they would not be included. And then finally, and this is kind of a change that the staff identified after the staff report was issued, we have had some recent inquiries from representatives of homeowner associations who want to develop these type of facilities potentially within the boundaries of the HOA for benefit of their members. So they're not commercial facilities as much as they are facilities that would be available for members only. And so in those instances, if you do adopt the urgency ordinance this evening, those type of facilities would be excluded from the moratorium as well. So we are, if the council wants to consider the adoption of this, we do have a recommendation for you. Again, this would be for the initial 45-day period. We would come back for future action consideration prior to the end of that 45-day period and take additional direction from the council at that time. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any questions?
I don't have questions. I just want to make sure we have discussion. Berlin, your light's on. So included in your proposal would be the 3 that are currently pending Planning Commission review?
That is correct.
Okay, that's really the only conversation piece I wanted to have up front is that I feel uncomfortable changing the rules after an application has been submitted for something. And I understand we can never control what other cities are doing near our boundaries, which it sounds like they're capitalizing in some way on it, but that's their choice. They take the risk by building next to our boundaries. So the 3 that are pending, I just wanted to raise that issue that I just don't like changing rules when someone has already started a process. So I would have concern with those. But as far as the moratorium to allow us to evaluate this and decide what a more permanent solution would be, I'm open to conversation on that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the 3, just for some clarification, Mr. Snyder, they still have to go through the process, correct? They just applied.
I think, and the council member can correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3 she's talking about have completed the land use entitlement approval process, but they're still going through their building and engineering approval processes. So they would be in the vein of they've got the land use entitlements, but they may not have completed substantial enough activities under the building permit process where they would not be impacted by the moratorium. So one potential consideration for the council is it's within your legislative authority to determine that those that have completed the land use approval process and are going through the building and engineering approval process would not be impacted by the moratorium. So I believe, Councilmember Lewis.
You're talking about the 3, right? Yeah, so I mean, I think that would be fair to let them continue through the process. However, with the moratorium itself, a legislative pause, I think, is the correct and good term. I think that we need to pause on the storage and really consider our land use moving forward in the city. And I mean, you spoke about the lack of industrial business we have here in our community. I think we really need to look at diversifying our employment base here too as well, and that's part of it with industrial. So, you know, in these storage facilities, I mean, how many employees do they have? You know, so one, yeah, you know, somebody on site. So I think, you know, leave it open for the council. But I mean, this is something I think we should consider. Give us a pause so we can really analyze our city as we're moving forward.
I completely agree. I think we need to look at the opportunity, particularly for light industrial, for, you know, larger job-producing organizations and companies to come in. I mean, we have 13 existing, and we're discussing, you know, the additional 3 that are pending. You know, our city probably needs to take a moment to take a step back and look at that. You know, with somewhere between 1, 3, 4, 5 people, that's not what I would consider job producing, and our land needs to have its highest and best use, and I think we need to take a look at what that means. So, yeah, I think we need to have that conversation.
Oh, I concur with Lupe and Wayman on I don't think we should go backwards. People that entitled and then came through and spent their money to move forward with a project should be allowed to go forward. I don't think changing the rules on it because of things going forward. I also want to know why, if we were worried about this process, why didn't we just encompass it where it could only go in certain areas where we felt comfortable doing it? Why? Because we did change it so that we were going to have office space or other retail on it in the frontage. Did we not when we first did it? For when we re-changed the general plan?
Right, so Councilmember, you're correct. We took an initial stab at controlling the impacts by requiring that fronting commercial or office use, retail or office use. However, we have not gone through the significant policy discussion on whether this type of land use, additional limitations should be placed on them. And this moratorium is that opportunity for the council, the commission, and the community to have that discussion. So an initial step, but not all the way down the road. And I would add that when we did the general plan update and adopted that in September 2019, the council at that time recognized that we had a low inventory of industrial land, in large part because a significant part of the area, the city area was already built out. So having the opportunity to continue to look at what we do with the land, to echo Councilmember Holmes' terms, I think is appropriate land use policy.
Yeah, I see that. But, you know, like on Highway 111, we stopped automotive uses, basically, and other stuff that was going to go through because we wanted it for other things. So we could have done it. My only concern is with that is that where do we stop? So now, if there's, I'll just use something else. I'm not saying it's like gas stations or grocery stores, because we have a lot. Did we put a moratorium and stop them? I mean, where does that, what I'm concerned about is stopping free trade and marketing for people that have their property, want to use it for what they feel is the best use. I do agree with the city, but I thought that's what the general plan and zoning was all about, was to limit people from being able to put different kinds of businesses in areas we didn't want to go.
It's a great point, Councilmember. One thing I would say is that the land use discussion is never static. You as a policy-making body will forever be engaged in that conversation about what's best for the community, because things change. The market forces change and the community changes. So certainly the discussion of, for this particular topic, we're just focusing on these type of facilities. Obviously, other facilities, if the council ultimately wanted to look at those, we could. For these type of facilities, again, I just feel obligated. We're only taking taking a timeout or a pause to discuss that. Ultimately, you as a council will make the final decision as to what you believe is appropriate for the community on this topic.
I get it. I was just making a point. I'm not saying that that's something there, but it's just that if the general plan wasn't new and we just hadn't done the zoning, I would think a little bit differently of it.
Sure.
But since we just got done and we've highlighted how important it was to put this thing in after 25 years, and I understand things change, so I understand that part. I just think that's a little dramatic, but that's my personal opinion. But thank you very much for the report.
We do have a public comment. Sabi?
Yes, we have Polo Doria.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council people. My name is Polo Doria, a commercial realtor and kind of a land use practitioner. Although I don't live in Indio now, I have been a longtime resident in the past, and I am a proud graduate of Indio High School, class of 1977. Let the record show that is a distinguished year. Thank you, Lupe. I've read the report, and just some insight. There's some valid points that staff has come up with, and although it may be kind of an overreaction to Glenn, like you mentioned, to an issue, moratorium is kind of a bad word on the private side. All I ask is this: if you do the moratorium, first of all, 45 days, you're not going to get anything done. It's going to take longer than that. So really, it'd probably turn into a year. A year is delay. So all I ask is, if you do go this way, that you not clip the knees of the applicant, the 4 applicants who started the process with the rules. They're in queue. They spent a significant amount of investment to get where they are, and now you're changing the rules. Is it 3 or 4? So the point being is that it's not good business. Once you do that, that word will spread like wildfire, okay? So if you want to change the rules, good, but don't do it with the people in queue. Let them go forward. Let them not miss one day of planning processes, because the rules were as they were when they applied, okay? So that's all that I ask, that if you alter in your exceptions on page number 3, Kevin outlined those things that are accepted to the moratorium. You should also add that existing projects in queue continue to move forward at their own risk. It doesn't mean they're approved. It just simply means you're going to get the vetting process for them like they were promised on the onset. So that's all that I ask. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you. And you know, I agree as well. That's good business, right? If I was running, if I made that investment in our community and was planning on opening up and had to move all that back, that would be pretty disappointing. And I think that is right. What you said, Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem and I kind of spoke on that. So.
Yeah. But I do want to thank our Planning Commission and Mr. Snyder here for bringing this issue up to our attention, because it is a concern for our employment and for our land use here. One more comment? Go ahead.
Yes, Mayor, I have one more comment on Zoom. Let me allow them to speak. And this will be Shane. Shane, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, City Council members. I'd like to confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks so much. I concur with everything that Polo mentioned in his public comment. I'm a land use consultant who works with developers and applicants looking to invest in Indio. And I just wanted to point out in the staff report, I know there's been discussion about 4 pending facilities, 3 facilities that have received approvals. There's actually a total of 7 facilities that appear to be in queue. So that includes facilities that have either received their land use entitlements or have submitted applications and are now actively in the application process. So to Polo's point, I respectfully request that any projects in queue, including those that have submitted applications and are in the review process, be exempted from a moratorium should such a moratorium be passed tonight. That's the extent of my comment. I appreciate your consideration, and have a good night. Thank you.
I have no more comments, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder, could you give us some insight into those other 4?
Sure. So in the staff report, and I believe in the PowerPoint, we have 4 applications for these type of facilities that are going through the land use entitlement process. And basically, to kind of distinguish it, the first step is to get your land use approvals, right? So you have to come in and get your land use approvals. That typically requires you go to Planning Commission. You're typically doing a conditional use permit and a design review public hearing process. So we have 4 applications that are going through that right now. We have 3 applications, we have 4 facilities that are going through that right now with going through the Planning Commission process. We have, no, at this moment they would not be exempt. And I think that's part of the conversation that, right. So, and then the 3 facilities that we talked about earlier, they have received their land use entitlements, but they haven't received their building and engineering. So the policy discussion for council and consideration is that you could consider a moratorium that did not apply to those total of 7 facilities. As it was pointed out, they're in the queue, to use that term. If you felt that it was appropriate that they continue through that process unaffected by the moratorium, as currently proposed, the 4 would be impacted by the moratorium, and the 3, if they have not made substantial progress in their building permits, which typically, in this instance, they're still going through the approval process to obtain their building and engineering approval, so that wouldn't typically be substantial progress. But the council could say that for those 7 facilities total, they're excluded from the moratorium if you choose to enact it this evening.
How much investment would go into that first step of the land use approval?
So typically, you're looking, are you looking monetarily? Typically, monetarily, you're looking around $15,000 in application fees. Now, that does not take into account the fees that applicants will pay on consultants. And while I can't give you actual dollar amounts, they can often be significant because they're preparing both planning documentation and CEQA environmental documentation. So they can spend several thousands of dollars on top of their city fees.
Thank you. Any discussion?
You know, I just wanted to make a comment. You know, while I support the moratorium, I think, you know, I'm a business owner. And so to go in and submit an application and go through the entire effort required for that, and then to have that yanked midstream does not work for me. So I would agree with the discussion that we've had.
Yeah, so my confusion was that the 4 were already approved and were being exempt, but they're not. So then it brings up the question of the green and the purple.
No, the green, they were already.
No, he says they're not exempt.
There's 7 that aren't.
There's 7.
Yeah, so green and purple are the ones we would be changing the rules on.
But it says planning approved.
I know, but he says that they're not exempt.
But we're looking at 2 different.
Maybe I can offer some clarity. The Mayor Pro Tem is correct. She's got the correct interpretation right now. As it is currently written, the only in progress, so not a fully functioning facility yet, the only ones that would be exempt are those that have a building permit and have started doing substantial work to construct their facility. And that's because that's the legal test for gaining vested rights to that development. So that was the legal standard. The city council can, of course, have a policy decision to say, you know what, we're going to bring it down to, okay, you've gotten your land use entitlements, but you haven't got your building permits yet, right? I don't know which color that is.
That's green.
That's green. Or the city council could say, if you filed an application for land use entitlements by the day of this moratorium, then you may continue to proceed as before. Everyone else, no applications will be accepted. So that seems to be your decision point. Do you keep it as is? Do you say only if you've completed your land use application? Or do you say only if you've submitted a land use application?
I might just add, if it's helpful, I think we see what's going, and that's certainly fine. It'll be, likely would be 20. If we have 13 now, these 7 likely would happen. However, if you did include them, as it is written now, you may tweak the rules a little bit, but it would be up to you what those rules are. They still would likely be built. They would just be built on slightly different rules than we have now, probably more strict is our assumption. So I hope no one thinks that, okay, I'm out, I'm done. No. A pause, 45, 90 days, whatever it might be, then there'd be some new rules that would apply to their application. But I think you're past that now, and certainly we're fine with that. I think the issue would relate to those that have never even submitted before. Yeah. And if you've allowed these 7, I think I would urge you at the early outset, when you get to the regulation, make them as firm and as stiff and as possible. And actually, those that have built probably wouldn't mind that because it's competition. But we're giving up land. Your successors, our successors, 10, 20, 30 years from now, will be grateful that you preserved enough job-producing land to support the community. And these 20 gobble it up.
And if I could add, I told you we had 9 inquiries in 2022. If you pass the moratorium, what the city manager is referring to and the city attorney, they would be impacted by the moratorium. We would not accept their applications. They would not be able to come in the door, so to speak, until that moratorium process was complete. I think the city attorney said it really well. We constructed this ordinance around the vesting privilege, but you as a council have policy discretion to push that back. And if you are, quote unquote, in the door, then the council could consider that you can proceed forward no matter if the moratorium is in effect or not. I do want to echo what the city manager said. We do not have a lot of industrial land in our city, and we do have parties that come to us and inquire about available lands, and they do have certain needs. And so the consumption of lands for non-employment generating land uses is a concern to me as Community Development Director for the city, and I think it's a topic that probably warrants additional conversation independent of this, so we can talk about that. But this evening, you have several options in front of you. We can certainly modify the moratorium if the consensus of the council is that you want to let those that are in continue forward.
I think we don't want to keep moving the goalposts if they've already been in the door. I think that's what the concern is, right? So I think we've already, so that would be 7.
So basically, if you enacted the moratorium, it requires a 4/5 vote. In the adoption of the urgency ordinance, you would need to, and I'm sure the city attorney can help construct the language, you would need to identify that the moratorium does not apply to those 7 existing facilities that are in for land use or other processing by the city.
And then we would have to clarify when it goes into effect, correct? Yeah.
So, the moratorium would take effect. It's an urgency ordinance, so it would take effect this evening if it's passed. Correct me if I'm wrong, City Attorney.
No, you're quite correct. I think if you were going to let the 7 slide, my recommendation would simply be to add to the list of exceptions those facilities for which a land use entitlement application has been filed as of the date that the moratorium is enacted.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Approximately how many acres does a project take that's a storage?
Unfortunately, Councilmember, it depends on what they're offering. You can look at.
But it's not more than 5.
So let me actually get to that. So I'm just going to give you some examples. I actually have my team. So we range on size of facilities from 4 acres up to anywhere to 10 acres. So it just really depends on what they're offering, particularly if you're offering outdoor storage together with indoor storage, you tend to accumulate a lot more land. So it just depends on the amount of land that is being considered by the use that's being proposed, but it ranges.
The next question I have is 45 days enough time for city to look at this?
So typically what would happen in that period is there would probably be an initial conversation. Typically, my experience is that we would try to develop an expedited work program, realizing that there is interest in this. Would typically work with the city manager and city attorney to make sure that that meets legal expectations and standards. And then normally what would happen is we would likely come back to you and ask for some additional time. The council can set parameters on that. State law says you can do an additional 10 months and 15 days, basically a full year with the 45 days. You as council could say, Planning Commission, staff, you have 3 months from this 45 days from now. You have 90 days to come back with your final recommendation. So you set the parameters of time. There's just state law that allows a maximum amount of time.
Yeah, so the initial 45 days is set by statute. So we're allowed to do this instantaneous, goes into effect tonight, no public notice in the newspaper, but only for 45 days. And then after this, we'd have to publish it in the newspaper, we have to hold a public hearing, and that's where you can extend it for up to 10 months and 15 days. Included in the ordinance is already direction to staff to get working on recommendations and to do studies. The expectation is likely you're going to have an extension coming forward, and at that time, if you want to give direction that you expect to see a proposed ordinance within a certain amount of time, that can be given to staff. I would recommend maintaining the moratorium in effect until a new ordinance is passed. You don't want to have gaps in any process that you do. So my expectation is you would see an extension. It would likely say 10 months, 15 days, but we want to see a draft ordinance within a certain amount of time.
And if you include the 7, there's less pressure, obviously. That'll be ample room for the market to absorb those 7, even if it does end up taking us a year. But the statute, we have to say 45 pursuant to the statute.
And if I could add, you might like, council likely could have several options presented to you. They can range from a do-nothing, basically status quo, to geographical limitations. You might say that they're limited in certain parts of the city, or they have to be geographically spaced from each other, and only as an example, to saying no more, a prohibition on future facilities. So typically what we would expect is we would go through this conversation with the Planning Commission, who is your land use advisory body. They're going to prepare a set of recommendation or set of recommendations to you, and then we would bring those forward as staff and have that conversation with you. You might accept the recommendations. You might send it back to the Planning Commission for additional conversation and review. So it's an interactive process, and it's somewhat iterative as well.
Well, I'm fine with it. I mean, if no one else has any further discussion, I'll make a motion.
With the exception
with the exception of the 7, right? So I'll make a recommendation to wait for reading of urgency ordinance number 1791. Request the city clerk to read the ordinance by title only and adopt urgency ordinance number 1791, adopting an interim measure imposing a moratorium on the use, construction, establishment, or operation of new self-storage facilities, mini storage facilities, and recreational vehicle storage facilities within the city of Indio.
Exempt.
With the exception of the 7 already in process.
I think with the exception of any facility that has a land use application on file with the city as of today.
That sounds good.
And that would be the 7, right, Kevin?
That would be the 7, yes,
Okay.
sir.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. Loopy second.
So we got a motion by Councilmember Furman and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Ramos Amit. Let's go ahead and vote. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Mayor. I also want to say thank you to Nicholas Gutron and Kendra Reef in the planning division. They did the majority of work on this, did a great job, and I want to extend thank you to them for all their great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, Mayor, for the record, I'd like to read the ordinance title. Ordinance number 1781, urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Indio adopting an interim measure imposing a moratorium on the use, construction, establishment, or operation of new self-storage facilities, mini storage facilities, and recreational vehicle storage facilities within the City of Indio, excluding non-commercial facilities constructed wholly within the boundaries of a legally operated homeowners association for the sole use and benefit of the members of the homeowners association. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. We'll go ahead and move on to 12.1, public hearings. First public hearing to solicit input from the public and City Council regarding the city's action plan as necessary for the receipt of our CDBG funds.
Good evening, Jesus Gomez, Housing and Neighborhood Services Manager, here before you again. This is actually the 14th year that I stand up here and hold this first of 2 public hearings related to our Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG program. We've had a very successful program. Next year, fiscal year 23-24 represents our 15th year, and also our final year of our 5-year consolidated plan, which is the strategic plan that goes for 5 years. And so tonight we'll be discussing, hopefully, funding proposals for next year for your consideration. And after we go through that process, and hopefully you agree with the funding recommendations that we will be putting before you, we will continue the action to ultimately get approval from you in May of later this year. So let me go through this brief presentation, which is just a brief summary of our staff report for the benefit of the community. As I mentioned, we have been a recipient of CDBG funding for now 14 years, entering our 15th year. We received this funding directly from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD. And as we all know, the process to receive the funding and also to implement the programs is very community involved, a community involved process that involves including the council and as well as members of the public. So for example, this, again, like I mentioned, is the first of 2 public hearings to give you and the public a chance to comment on the proposed uses of the funds. We have taken some direction from the council, and we want to stick with what we've talked about over the last few years, which is focusing on keeping that money and using it in-house. Typically, we do use roughly 88% of the funding for programs that are internal to us. We primarily have done public infrastructure improvements over the years. Roughly 65% of the money that we've received, we have used to build parks, streets, rehabilitate other public infrastructure like sidewalks, and do gutter and ADA sidewalk improvements, and other public infrastructure improvements, including facility improvements. We've done improvements to the senior center and teen center. And we also want to follow some of the thoughts of the council on how much do we spend on our public services. Mainly, what we've been doing is funding the local nonprofits, mainly Martha's Village and Kitchen, the Coachella Valley Rescue Mission, and Find Food Bank that provide homeless services and services to the food insecure. More in the last couple of years through our CARES Act funding. So by use of that, we've been able to increase the funding to them. And as now that funding has been depleted, as of this year, at the end of this year, those funds will be depleted. We're looking at simply having CDBG funds available to fund them. We are recommending that we continue funding to them at the pre-COVID-19 pandemic levels, which, as we can see here by the funding allocations, if you look at Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3, those are the broad category areas of expenditures that are allowed by HUD. One is administration, as you can see the number 1. That's for operating expenses, grant management costs, and going into this next year, we'll be preparing our next 5-year consolidated plan, which we will seek the help of a consultant, and that's very involved. And 20% of the fund typically goes to administration, and that's what all cities, as I reported before, typically allocate. The next group is number 2 on public services. There is a cap of 15%. We are proposing to use 15% of our yearly allocation to fund continued fair housing services that we're required to do by HUD and tenant landlord mediation, and continue our senior meals program out of the senior center. That also is part of the funding that we are considering as in-house funding because it is provided through our senior center. Items 3, 4, and 5, actually 4, 5, and 6 those are the 3 homeless and food distribution centers here that we've talked about before. Each would be receiving, if you go with our recommendation, of $24,000 each. Again, those levels is funding similar to what they were receiving. In fact, it's just slightly more than what they were receiving before the pandemic. The third category is public infrastructure, and over the last couple of years, we've been focusing on being compliant with our ADA requirements, Americans with Disability Act requirements, and we are proposing that we work on the Kenner Street and Jewel Track neighborhoods to bring curbs up to standard. You may be familiar with the Kenner neighborhood. If you could see there in those dots, those are the curb upgrades that, in working with the Public Works Department, are being recommended for upgrades to bring us into compliance through ADA. We also have the Jewel Track neighborhood, mainly on Palo Verde. There's quite a few that need improvements. We looked at Dillon Avenue, for example, on some needs there and other streets, but the focus seems to be on the north and south Palo Verde Street. So I mentioned earlier that the next process would be to hold a public hearing in in May. You will have another opportunity to discuss this funding. We will also be publishing our draft action plan with the proposed improvements during April. But that's a brief summary, and I'll put it back here if you have any questions about the proposed allocations. We do hope that you support this recommendation, but any changes that you decide to make today would be included in the draft action plan that will be available for public review in April. But these are the recommendations that we're presenting in consultation and with our city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Do we have any questions for staff? No?
That's good.
Turn your light on.
Oh, one question I had was for the ramp improvements. Does that include any parts of the sidewalk or just those corner ramps there?
It's those corner ramps and any improvements around it to make that easy, the transition that's necessary, and some asphalt improvements.
Okay, thank you.
Most of those areas, have new sidewalks, right? Correct, they're getting new sidewalks, so, I'm talking about the Jewel community. So, yeah, that's, not Jewel, I'm McKinnon, so this is really good, yes.
You know, that's a very good point, council member, that I wanted to point out. Thanks for reminding me. The work there with these ADA ramps in the entire Kenner neighborhood will conclude all the work that's needed of infrastructure there, from the street, from the sidewalk, and all the repairs. And if you notice here on the screen, the improvements are on the southwest quadrant. All the other ones in the other 3 quadrants there in that neighborhood have been completed, and this will culminate the improvements there. So that very good point.
Thank you. If there's no other questions for staff, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Do we have any public comments, Ms. Sanchez?
None, Mayor.
No? All right, close it. Go ahead and close the public hearing. Any discussion from council?
I think it's a good plan. I think we should go forward with it, but I still think the seniors, Fine Food Bank, Martha's Village and Kitchen, and also the Rescue Mission, I think we should, if we have another budget adjustment, we should raise them up to $50,000. I think they're too vital for our community, and if we have extra money from our TOT tax and other things, that we should raise them up, use this plan for now. But I think in putting money into those organizations helps us in the long run with our homeless issues and other issues, and feeding our seniors during Fridays and weekends that don't have an opportunity to get a meal. I think is vital to us.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll look at adding some of those during our budget talks there.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other discussion? No? Go ahead and entertain a motion.
Oh, wait, do we need a motion? Let's conduct the first public hearing, yeah.
Do we have a second public hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the first of 2. The final one would be in May.
So we leave it open?
No, you conduct the first public hearing, and you close the public hearing.
That's what I thought.
All right.
So we'll make a motion.
Yes.
Okay, we'll make a motion.
Who's got this motion? That reminds me, we used to have staff always give us the recommended motion.
And I may be wrong, but I don't believe they're.
No, the recommendation's on the staff report, and that's just to conduct the first public hearing, which we did, correct? So
Close the public hearing.
Yeah, there's no
so we
required
need a second.
action, so
All right.
you've
Thank
done the
you.
thing you need to do.
All right.
We will do that.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to public comments for items not on the agenda. I have 2 here. Do we have any other ones? No? First one, we have Christopher Martinez.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. My name is Christopher Martinez. I am a resident of Indio and a retail cannabis applicant. I am making comments today to request help on a time-sensitive matter. As an applicant, we have 10 calendar days to file an appeal on our application results. As part of the appeals process, we are required to state specific reasoning and grounds for our appeals. We cannot do this because we currently haven't received any information about our interview other than our actual scores. We would like the opportunity to make a well-informed decision. In order to do that, we need adequate information, which is why we requested a copy of our interview evaluation report, among other items. Our request for these records has been considered public records request, which can take up to 10 business days. This timeline puts us past our appeal deadline and may force us to make a blind decision on a $3,600 fee to appeal. We are requesting that our evaluation report for our application be provided urgently, while our other documents be provided as they become available. The city has delayed its self-imposed deadlines multiple times in this process. Phase 2 results were delayed for two weeks, and Phase 3 results were delayed for 4 weeks. We understand delays may be warranted, so we ask for the same courtesy to extend our deadline to appeal so that we may have adequate time to receive the requested information and make a well-advised decision. I also have some concerns regarding local ownership and qualification components of the interview process. On January 25th, prior to our interviews, we requested information on the rubric and these sections with no response. From experience, we have witnessed large corporation companies gain local ownership requirements with buyout options, allowing the removal of the local owner once the license is issued or shortly after, and profit sharing or decision-making restrictions where the local owner has no say in the business decisions or receives less than 51 or majority percentage of the profits. These tactics prohibit local owners from being truly a majority owner, and I believe they do not fulfill the council's intent of local ownership criteria in this process. The local component was compared to contractors applying for an RFP. A contractor would not partner up with a local resident who has zero experience in their trade just to receive additional points with the risk of being deemed unqualified. Lastly, many of the local owners typically used in these instances have zero experience in the space. How can an applicant be deemed qualified when the majority of the ownership has little to no experience in the industry? These tactics place my partner and I at a disadvantage where 100% of our ownership is of Indio residents and 100% of our ownership has accumulated over a decade of experience in this industry. I appreciate your time on this matter, and I hope that we are afforded the opportunity with adequate information to make a logical and justified decision. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I have a second one from Mr. Pedro Ordonez. Yes. Thanks.
Hello, Council. My name is Pedro Ordonez, a resident of the City of Indio and a cannabis applicant. I'm here to address some concerns with the application process. In 2021 and 2022, I was present throughout the process of implementing the ordinance for cannabis. It was this council who wanted to give the opportunity to local residents who were applying. The council was clear on the intent of a local owner. As part of its effort to help local entrepreneurs compete against these large corporations, the council wanted a local component, and I thank the council for that. Just to meet these requirements, these corporations gained the system by giving 51% of the business on paper to local residents. On January 25th, 2023, my partner and I decided to draft up an email to address the matters and get further understanding of how the city would grade the application. That email was never addressed. My partner and I were assured that the city staff would catch on to these tactics with a series of questions that were asked during the interview process. These questions specifically asked owners who was listed or showed up to the interview. Some of these local residents have little to no cannabis experience, yet meet all the requirements. During the interview process, we weren't allowed to elaborate or explain more of our local ties. It was a simple yes or no. So just asking, did the city confirm the local component of each application? Did the city verify any agreements with these local owners? Are the scores going to be weighted out differently if there's a buyout option for these owners to remain in the business? It just seems the staff and the council had two different ideas of the local component, giving local operators with experience a fighting chance against these big corporations. Due to these tactics, true Indio residents with experience were at a disadvantage. Just like to thank you guys for the opportunity. Thank you.
City Manager, who can we direct them to in
Well,
staff?
actually, I'd like to request that an urgency item be added to the agenda to address the 10-day appeal. I think that's enough to address the 10-day appeal period. So it would take 4/5 vote. I would like to make a motion to add an urgency agenda item to the agenda to discuss the 10-day appeal period. So I would need a second if you guys want to talk about it, because staff can't change the rules. It's already done. And next time we meet for city council is 14 days, so it'd be beyond the 10 days.
I do see a concern if the public records request is 10 days and the appeal is 10 days, then it could overlap.
So that's why I'm asking for a second, so we can talk about it. So are you going to second it?
So I'll make this, I'll second it so we can have a
Okay, so
discussion.
we have a motion and a second. You have to call for the vote, and there has to be
Right.
forfeits.
We'll go ahead and do a vote here.
Anything,
Mr.
City
Graham, we okay here?
Attorney?
It sounds like you guys already have a motion and a second, and the Mayor Pro Tem's quite right as to the procedure for adding something to the agenda. I don't disagree. If you add it to the agenda, we can discuss
Just discuss it.
the question.
We're not going to make any decisions. It's just a discussion.
But in order to have a discussion about extending the application, the appeal deadline, you need to add it to the agenda. You're correct. So if that's something you want to discuss?
Do we want to also discuss the local ownership part of it?
No, that's a later date. Today, we just need to discuss the time period so we can have time to discuss it.
Gotcha. Okay. Ready for, can you get a roll call vote, please?
We will do roll call since I don't have that on the.
Sounds good.
Councilmember,
Aye.
Aye.
Councilmember Glenn Miller,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ramos Amit,
Aye.
and Mayor Ortiz.
Aye.
Okay, so.
Motion passes 5-0.
Yeah, so the discussion is, in my opinion, all the applicants are, should be allowed access to whatever public information there is on the way that it was scored. I'm not sure how that process was. The council's totally out of this process, so we don't know anything. And I didn't even know about the 10-day appeal. And to give city clerk and staff ample time to prepare the response to whatever public requests there is, I would hope that there could be, and I don't know what legal action we need to take to extend the appeal time.
Before you go, City Manager, it's like, I think what we can do is, once they receive their records and, you know, from staff, then the 10 days will kick in at that point.
Yeah, but it's still a legal action.
Yeah, I was going to state, and even the speaker indicated, there's some initial information to be very quick to provide. And then they're dumping on some, their request and many others is elaborate. And this is could be a potential way of just delaying the process, right? So I think we can provide some immediate information as indicated that would give them the information as to whether or not they had appeal or not within just a day or two. I mean, we're compiling that now. The rest of that request, as he stated, could come in thereafter as they're preparing their actual appeal. Because they have 10 days to decide, then there's a time frame within which to set the appeal. They will present their information and have time. That subsequent information perhaps could come by that time.
Right. And, you know, so just to address the specific issue that's in play here today, the appeal needs to state with specificity what the basis for your appeal is. So, you know, for example, I'm appealing because I believe you scored these sections incorrectly, right? They can make that appeal now. There's nothing stopping them.
They don't know the sections.
Well,
They don't have any information.
in listening to the speakers, it seemed the concern was there is an appeal fee of $3,600. Right. And so I would recommend, in lieu of changing the appeal time, simply we can bring back something that would authorize the city manager. If someone wants to withdraw their appeal before the hearing, we can refund the fee. It seems that that's the actual issue, is they don't want to pay the fee. And to say that, oh, we have a losing appeal.
But Stephen, how do you turn in an application for an appeal when you don't know what your basis is? Because you don't have.
And I think I'll just jump in. You know, we may be getting too much into the detail, but these applications, I mean, there is detail. They know exactly what they were to submit. They know exactly what they attested to.
But they don't know where they scored low.
That's what we can provide quickly.
We can provide that quickly.
That's the portion that's easy to provide. There's some other requests that are much more time consuming.
I think if we worked with staff, we could commit to getting that out tomorrow before close of business.
But I think the issue is they have 10 days to appeal. So if they do it on day 10, you know, you have 10 days after that, it extends it, you know, so far out. I mean, they'd have to actually appeal without getting the paperwork. I mean,
they'll get it.
These gentlemen here are here, so they already are planning probably to appeal. But the other people, if they haven't got their records, are you going to be able to get it within a certain amount of time? You say they get it within 8 days they offer from when they got it, so they're in the 8th day. So are you going to get those people the next day, their appeal, their paperwork, so you have it?
So we can get them the specific items that they said were critical to making that decision We can get that to them tomorrow.
Okay.
Why don't you just send it to everybody? That way they don't have to request it.
Once it's a public record, it's public for everyone, so I have no issue with that.
Okay.
My
So let's just send it to everybody.
My concern, we talked about this with the moratorium, right?
Yeah.
Changing the rules of the game, like that.
Right.
That appeal process is set.
Yeah, but we didn't set it.
The appeal deadline was set by ordinance.
But that's for a different kind of bid for contractors.
No, it's specifically in the ordinance for the cannabis
Yeah,
application.
I think what the issue is they can't appeal what they don't know they're appealing at.
Right,
So
right.
we want them to get the information.
When does the 10-day count start? Because
When they got the letter?
It starts from when they receive the letter.
And when is that?
Registered, no. It'll be very, it may
Sometime this
vary.
week.
Yeah, some of them already received it, others tomorrow, yesterday, today.
So they sign for it, so
Yes.
you know when it is?
Yes.
So what you're saying is, let them appeal, if they decide to appeal, if they, further on, once they get the information within that period of time, they can go back and you'll give them back the $3,600. What you're saying is, they look at it and say, there's nothing to appeal, we'll go
I think
backwards.
that
and
is,
give it to 'em.
I think
Absolutely.
that's a much better solution to the issue that I heard than changing the deadline for appeals. And the only reason I bring that up is every time a city has messed around with the deadlines on this stuff,
Right.
it's led to a lawsuit.
Right, it's open up.
Whereas
right.
refunding a fee,
Right.
that's something the city council's perfectly
Right,
capable of.
but shame on us for not catching the 10 days. Because this was a complicated process.
Right.
And we haven't even seen it, and I don't even think
Yeah.
I can absorb it in one day to
The-
make a decision myself.
The
because-
cannabis application process is a very complex machine that you try to keep running
Yeah.
as best you can. I think that it's a clear issue, and we can propose amendments in the future.
And I agree with you. The more I think, as you announce that and you discuss, I agree with you, because if not, you're holding up the other applicants that have already got it, who then can come backwards. So they either appeal, and if they decide not to appeal, we can give them back their $3,600. If they want to go forward, then they're making that decision to go forward with the information they get, because they might not get every information they want. I mean, they might be seeking something that's not there. So I'm good with that. I think we can't hold up everyone, but we give them an opportunity to appeal in the process, and we give them the paperwork as quick as we can. So I'm good with the refunding the $3,600 if they decide to pull back.
Yeah, so am I. I don't want to mess with the process.
Either
I
do I.
really don't.
I don't know anything about the process, so I don't want to get too
So
deep
can
in
we,
it.
can we just simply get council direction that the city manager is authorized to refund the appeal fee of any appellant who withdraws their appeal before the hearing? Could that be sent to
But is
council?
that an action?
I think that it's well within his authority.
Well,
I
it's
just,
within director's authority, I think.
yeah.
If there's no objection,
Just wanna
that's
make
how
sure
I
you're
will
okay with it.
operate.
We don't
Yeah.
normally refund fees.
That's
We
why I
love
said,
fees.
but I think it's within director's authority to refund a fee.
But the council's okay with that.
Yeah, and if there's anyone listening, or yourselves or others want to learn more about the process, we have that full website that shows clearly what will be scored. There is a rubric information they've requested, it's easy to provide that and how they scored, but this is a very detailed application. There is no question, I think it'd be very difficult for someone to know not what they're not going to be or what they are going to be scored on. It's all there. It's very detailed.
Still looking for the executive summary.
I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. All right. Any other public comments? Good. We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Next meeting is April 5th.